It's Amber Matz, and this is Keeping Drupal Up to Date. So we're going to be talking about updating Drupal's minor or patch version. So if that's what you're here to see, then you're in the right place. My name is Amber Matz. I'm a production manager and trainer at Drupalize. That means that I work endless hours to try and get great tutorials and content up on Drupalize to help people learn Drupal. So we have, for Drupal 8, we have both written documentation and a video content. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that throughout the weekend. In this session, I'm going to talk about some terms and assumptions related to updating a Drupal site. I'm going to walk through a standard update procedure, which is a little more complicated than it used to be. And I'll walk through some tips for using Drush and Composer. Part of the complication here is that tools have changed and evolved. And so we have some muscle memory related to using those tools, and some of that muscle memory needs to change as well. So I'll be going over that, and then I'll share with you some related Drupal.org issues that are addressing some of these complications, and also some learning resources where you can get more information. So let's start out with some terminology. So we're talking about updating. I just want to be really clear that we're talking about updating. We're talking about updating Drupal core's minor version. So this would be like from 8.4.0 to 8.5.4 or something like that, or even like 8.5.2 to 8.5.4. This is not upgrading, also known as migrating. So to upgrade Drupal core from like a major version, like from Drupal 6 to Drupal 8 or Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. I think there is a migrate session here during the week. I think it's today at 2:30. And so if you are interested in that, you should go to that session as well. So yeah, we're talking about updating, not upgrading today. So we can't really talk about updating without mentioning semantic versioning. So Drupal 8 uses semantic versioning. You might also hear it referred to as SEMVer. I don't really usually refer it to that, but you'll see that term as well. And Composer uses it too. So it's something that's important to understand. And so if we have a version that's x.y.z, X would be the major version, Y would be the minor version, and Z would be the patch version. And by semantic versioning, what we mean is this is a versioning system that has some meaning. Like you can learn something substantive just by looking at the release number. And you can look at that release number and know something reliable about it. So it's not just a random thing, and you may have run into this before if you've been using Drupal for a while. Release numbers could be anything, especially with contrib modules. So it could be like 7.x and then 1.x/alpha or something, or dash alpha or something, and it could just have any old thing that it wanted there. But with semantic versioning, we have this particular system, and this is what, and we have a major version, a minor version, and a patch version. The major version, this means that there's a breaking change to the API. It's not backwards compatible with a previous major version. So that's the most important thing to understand. So that's why upgrading from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 is a major undertaking, and that's why it requires a migration, because you have to map the functionality to a totally new API, and that requires a whole different process than updating. But a minor version update is introducing a new features, so one or more significant new features. And in Drupal land, that usually means like a new module, like it might have an experimental status, or a previous module with experimental status might have stable status now. And so it's some new features, which is really great for Drupal now, because we can have new features every 6 months, and Drupal can continue to evolve. We don't have this kind of frozen thing where we're like overly reliant on contributed modules to introduce really important new features. And we can introduce those really important features into Drupal core. This also means that there's no breaking changes. So there's compatibility within the major version when you have a minor version upgrade. And then that last number, if that number increments, then that means we have a patch release. So this could be anything from a bug fix to one or more bug fixes, or it could be a security related release. So that is something that you still want to pay attention to, because even though it's just a patch release and it'll be rolled into the next minor release, you really want to pay attention to those, because it could be introducing a fix for a security vulnerability, which is what we ran into last month. So Drupal releases a minor update every 6 months. This is another reason to really have a good understanding and have a good process for updating your site, because there is this regular release schedule now. And patch releases will occur as needed, but they will still be announced ahead of time so that you can plan your maintenance window and you can set aside some time to do that. And usually that's about once a month, but they can occur more than that. Yes?
What is the 6-month window with dates?
Those are published on Drupal.org. So you can look up the Drupal release schedule and you can see what the dates are, the actual dates for that. So when Drupal releases a new version, or when they announce a new minor version, you want to evaluate the release. So for a minor release, you want to know what new features does it have. Are these things that you've been using maybe with a contrib module, or you've been testing it out in experimental status, and now it's got a new stable version, and that's really exciting. Or is it a patch release, and what bug fixes are in there, and what exactly is being changed? How does this affect your site? Is it a security release? Is this critical? How time sensitive is it that you do these updates? What additional testing might you need to do on your site? So those are the kinds of things that you want to look at. You also want to look at, did the default.settings.php file get changed? Usually you don't have to worry about that, because your settings file is a custom file that has your particular site information, in particular the database credentials. You don't usually concern yourself with that, but you do want to check the release notes just to make sure there isn't something new in there, because you'll need to update that as well, and pay particular care not to overwriting your settings. So some assumptions and prerequisites for this talk. I am talking about Drupal 8. So if you want to update something else, then you can look at the documentation for that. But I am going to focus on Drupal 8. It's the latest version of Drupal. It's been out for a few years now, and so that's what we're talking about. I realize that not everyone is on Drupal 8, but that's what this talk is about today. And also, as a prerequisite, your user will need to have administer software updates permission. So as you go through this process, there are 2 places in particular where you will need that permission: when you enter into maintenance mode, and also when you run the update script at the end. So you will need that permission in order to accomplish those tasks. I'm also assuming, and maybe I'll just ask, that you're at least familiar enough with the command line to be able to copy and paste commands into a terminal, that you know how to access your server, and you can look up commands if you don't know them. But I am going to provide those commands, but understand that those are mostly shortcuts, and there is usually a manual way of doing that. But is anyone never touched a terminal in their life? And this is not a shaming exercise. I just want to know, is anyone not familiar with command line at all? Okay, good. So, because I am going to be providing those shortcuts today. I'm also making the assumption that you are using version control. So if you're not using version control, and maybe one of the sites that you administer isn't under version control, one of the first things, that's why you want to kind of check on this early. So I heard a lot of stories in our local Slack channel with the last round of security releases, and kind of the war stories were going around, and it's like, oh yeah, this one site that I got dumped onto my desk, they didn't have version control, and that was the first thing that they needed to do. So cease use of FTP, start using Git. If you need to get up to speed with that, there are lots of resources online for how to do that, but so important to be using version control. So, and also, make sure you have a documented, written down process for how you're getting your files up to wherever it's hosted. And especially if you're administering multiple sites, different clients, different projects, maybe like you're only touching the site once every 6 months or so, really write that down. Take the time to do that. Don't think that you're going to remember how to do that. Really document your process and test it out. Especially, you know, I decided to do this talk after this last round of security releases, after I saw kind of the frenzy that was going on. And it's so important to document that process and really have a sense of what needs to happen, because that security vulnerability was weaponized within hours. And you really don't have time to figure out what's going on when it's that tight of a window. So it's really important to go through and be able to follow a procedure step by step. So I'm hoping that you've got that at least in mind for the next time. Yeah.
When you talk about files, you're talking about the
code base.
About the modules.
Yeah, I'm going to go into that. But yeah, I'm talking mostly about the code base,
Yep.
like that you have a way of deploying your new code to your site. Yeah. I'm also going to make an assumption that whenever I say composer, like to run a composer command, what I mean, with the word composer, I mean like whatever the path is to composer or the composer.far on your system. So whatever that is for you, that's what I mean. I'm just going to use composer, but you should replace that with however you have composer installed on your system. And if you need to install composer, you can go to getcomposer.org/download. Also, another caveat, your process might be different if you are with a Drupal-friendly host and they have, you know, some great buttons on their dashboard that help with core updates. So your process may be different. But it's also really good to understand the overall process so that you know what's happening and it's not all magic. So the problem is that you may have used, we've got some new processes and tools, and one of the big ones is Composer. You may be running into some pain if you used Composer to install a module that required that you use Composer, and you followed their instructions and you ran Composer require from the root of your Drupal site, and that set in motion some things. And then you didn't install Drupal with Composer, but you've installed this module. And now you originally installed Drupal with a tarball maybe. But now you've kind of got this mix. You've got a little bit of Composer, and then you've got this manual process, and you are following the instructions in update.txt, and you've removed your core and vendor directories, and you've added the new ones, and you're wondering why your site is now broken. So this is the problem that I'm trying to illuminate and help solve. And the instructions that I'm going to give you are from a patch on an issue that is fairly new. It's not committed yet, but it's, I think, a better, clearer process for handling this contingency. So this is the problem that you may have already run into. You may be wondering what's going on, and this is kind of the sticky situation. But even if you haven't run into this particular problem, you still will have a process by the end that should work in a number of different scenarios. Okay, so when we're talking about updating, we should know that there's 3 parts of a Drupal site. So we have our code base, we have our database, and we have our files. So by code, I mean like the core and the vendor directories, all of these scaffolding files, all these individual files that are one level above the core directory, and any kind of example files. So you'll see a lot of those in the site's default directory. So we have a number of different candidates for updating. So the things that are in green, those are definitely going to be updated. So we've got core, that's going to be updated. And then we have the core dependencies in the vendor directory. The vendor directory was created by Composer, but you may or may not be using Composer as of yet to update your site. But that's where your dependencies are, your PHP dependencies. You've got a whole bunch of scaffolding files that will need to be that may or may not change. They probably aren't, but they're part of core as well. But you want to pay particular attention to the ones in yellow, like your htaccess file and your robots.txt file. That's going to be a part of like the core package that you download, but you may have customizations in there. So you want to make sure you definitely back those up and you've got an extra copy there so that you can reapply your customizations after you update. And then we've got the top level modules, profiles, sites, and themes. Now those are definitely custom, okay? That's where you're putting your contributed modules, your custom theme, any contributed themes. And then in the sites directory, you've got your files, and that's all of your uploaded files and such, and your settings.php. So you don't want to just wholesale copy the download to your site, right? You will just have a brand new site. You won't have an upgrade, you'll have a new site. So you want to be familiar with the structure and which files are custom and which ones are not. And that's also why we don't hack core, right? So to make this process very clear and consistent, okay? So the database is used to store Drupal site content, configuration, state, logging information. So that's the second piece that will need to be updated. And then the files, we're talking about the public and private. You may or may not have private files directories. This is all uploaded files, your config, image derivatives, caches of various sorts, translations. This usually is not under version control, but it still needs to be backed up because you assigned it to the intern and they overwrote your site's directory, right? So, you want to have a backup of that, and having some kind of scheduled backup in a different sense, like that's something that you want to make sure you're doing, especially since it's not under version control. You might also have other project files. So you might have special, build processes or scripts or backup directories and stuff like that. So that's your Drupal site. So let's briefly talk about areas to backup. So you want to make sure you've got backup of your code, your database, and your files. In particular, the code in the database, okay? And with the code in particular, your htaccess and your robots.txt, if you've customized it. Your code should be version controlled. You should already have a pretty good backup of it. Maybe check the site's git ignore to see what's not being backed up so that you totally know, like, is the vendor directory in version control? Some are, some aren't. Like, it's kind of it's really a gray area. So you really want to double check. Don't assume that the vendor directory is being controlled by Composer and that it's just going to work. It might be under version control. And you also want to, I'm just going to keep saying this, like you might have customizations in htaccess and robots.txt. So make sure you have a copy of those. I like to use Drush SQL-DUMP and output that to a backups directory, one level up in my projects directory, and you can name that. You can do, there's all sorts of options for SQL-DUMP. You can check out drushcommands.com for that. You can configure SQL-DUMP with a configuration file. You can use this drush.yaml file, and there's an example configuration on GitHub. So you can go to the Drush GitHub and you can see an example configuration file. So you can do things like say, I only want to back up this set of tables, or I want to ignore all the cache tables and things like that. So you can configure it so that you don't have your backups don't include a bunch of session data or a bunch of cache data that you don't need. You can also use MySQLDump if you don't have Drush. So you can look up the documentation for that, but basically you can pipe that through gzip and you'll have a nice archive. And I find it to be quite a bit faster than Drush, actually. So it's probably a similar process, but you can use MySQLDump if you have that on your local machine, and that's pretty handy. You can also use phpMyAdmin. Go select your database and go to the export tab, and you can get an archive that way. Basically, there's no excuse for not backing up your database. There's lots of tools, and it's pretty easy to do. Just document your process. Decide on a tool and document it. Your hosting provider might have some nice clicky buttons on their dashboard, and those are super handy too. So I know Pantheon does, and I'm sure other hosts do as well. Back up your files. You really don't want to overwrite your sites directory. Back that up, back up your settings in particular. Like, that's just really critical information that you don't want to lose. So make sure you've got a backup of that. And your sites, whatever files, if you've got a multi-site, well, I'm sure your server admin can be your new best friend on that. So, and again, Drupal-friendly hosts will have dashboard tools for backing up files. I like to use tar. It's pretty simple. So there's, with gzip compression, you can pass in that Z flag to get a gzip. So you can have a nice archive for that. If you want bzip2 compression, just replace the Z with the J and you get bzip2. It's just your preference. A place that used to work at, the guy really liked bzip2, so that's how I learned that. But it's just two different archiving formats. There's also a great module called Backup and Migrate. They have a stable version 8 for Drupal 8 now. So that's nice because you can schedule it. So it can run on a regular schedule and you can have hourly backups, not even have to think about it. You can run a manual backup right before you upgrade, so you have an extra one, and then you're set. You're set to go. So that's really nice. Okay, here we go. To the good stuff. Standard update procedure. So step 1, you're going to log in as a user with administer software updates permission. So that's going to be an admin, but if your team, you just check your user, make sure you've got that permission. Put your site in maintenance mode. So this is going to press pause on your database, okay? Especially if you're doing commerce or anything like that. This is a critical step because you don't want to have any more database updates to your site. So put your site in maintenance mode. Maybe at that point, run your backup. If you've got a really active site that has commerce or anything like that, you're going to want to do maintenance mode and then do another backup right then, and then proceed. So you can get there by going to administration, configuration, development, maintenance mode. It's a really great idea. Like, you check that box there. Once you check this box, like, your site is in maintenance mode, so you can't really get around. So do yourself a favor and keep that tab open during this process so that you can get back to it and turn it off again without having to look up the path. I used to always have to, like, oh no, how do I get back to this page? When I was first starting Drupals, and I had to Google the path name. So just do yourself a favor, keep that page open. And then step 3, so here's where it kind of forks, okay? Now we need to determine if your site was installed with Composer or not. So you may or may not know this depending on, like, your situation, but you can find out. So run composer info Drupal/core. If it succeeded, then your project is managed with Composer. If it failed, it's not. Don't panic. It's just not. Now you know. It's not managed with Composer. You can also look at the composer.json in the root directory of your Drupal site and look for this Drupal/core. You'll see a JSON array, and you'll see, like, it's organized in different ways. And there's these keys, so you'll have like a require key, and then indented under that will be a list of things. If you see Drupal core listed under require, then it's managed with Composer. If it's listed under replace, then it's not managed. So even if it's in there, you don't want to just look for Drupal core. You want to see which key it's under. So that's how you need to find out if your site is managed under Composer or not. So now, if your site is not managed with Composer, you're going to go ahead and remove old code. This should be done on your local environment, and then deployed to your site as usual. Okay, so this is just like as if you're working on a feature for the site, and you're going to, commit that feature and push it up to your repo, and it's going to get deployed. This should be treated just like that. Okay, so you're not doing these changes on the live site. So remove the core and the vendor directories. Again, this is not a Composer managed site, so you can use those tools. Just make sure you're in the right directory before you run the RM. Make sure you're in your Drupal core, your root site, before you do that. This is going to remove your core and the vendor and all of the scaffolding files, those individual files. So you've got your backups already, you've backed up your htaccess and your robots.txt. Maybe you've just copied them as a different name or something, or you've taken some care to make sure that those are not going to get wiped out. And now you're going to download the update from Drupal.org. So you can have this handy so that you can just run this wget command and it'll pull down. This is a especially nice thing to have documented because during a security release, Drupal.org could go down. We had 500 errors happening during the first security release. It's a nice idea to have like a link like this. This might work sooner than access to the site. So this is a good thing to write down. And obviously the XYZ, you're going to replace that with whatever the latest version is. Extract the archive file. You can use tar for that. And now, before we copy things over, just remember, we're not going to overwrite your modules, themes, profiles, or sites directory. So you're going to apply the new code. I'm just going to keep repeating it. Copy your files, but don't overwrite your modules, themes, profiles, and sites. It used to be that all your modules and themes were in sites too. And so all you had to worry about was sites. But now we've got these top-level modules and themes and profiles. So that's why there's just some extra things to think about and remember. So yeah, just remember, keep that in mind. It's not just sites we're protecting. We're protecting your modules, profiles, and themes. Okay, now if your site is managed with Composer, what you do instead, you're going to replace steps 4 through 6 with Composer Update. And Composer is the path to your Composer, however you have it installed. You can have it on a per site basis. You might have as part of your process like Composer self-update, so that you know that your whole team is using the latest version of Composer before you proceed. That's a good extra step to put in there. But you run Composer Update, and that will update your core and vendor directories. Yes?
Shouldn't you be using -- with dependencies?
It's possible. Yes, like there's different. Every question about Composer, I'm gonna just respond with it depends. Yeah, but most of the time, yeah, that is going to be the case. So check the documentation. Like, don't use my slides as your end-all be-all documentation. Like, check. This is what the command is, but you're probably going to have to use the with dependencies, and you might even need more. I'm going to go through a process of updating a site managed with the Drupal Composer template, and that's an even longer thing. So there's even more arguments to pass through. So it depends. But probably, does someone have any insight into that? If it's always going to be that or not?
You know, when you run Composer Update like that, it's going to update not only Drupal core, but all your Drupal modules as well, and Symfony and all kinds of stuff in the background. So this is kind of the nuclear option.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is going to update everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you need to break down that update into different commits, let's say you're committing to a repository, you might want to look at just specifically targeting, I just want to do core.
Right.
With dependencies, right? I just want to, you know, the process we use is we do all the modules first, and then.
So then in that case, you would say Composer Update Drupal/core. And then
With dependencies.
-- with dependencies.
Yeah.
And so that would be, so yes, that's an excellent point. So this is like the nuclear option, just to repeat for the recording. This is the nuclear option. I can never say that right. My husband always makes fun of me. But anyway, so anyway, that's, you know, this will update core and your modules. So running Composer Update Drupal/core -- with dependencies is probably a safer way to go, especially if you want to do this incrementally. Like, all we're doing right now is Drupal core. Okay, everyone clear on that? Okay, so next what you want to do, regardless if your site is managed with Composer or not, is check the release notes for changes to default.settings.php. So if default.settings.php was changed, what that means is there's probably a new variable in there. There's probably a new configuration or something in there. It might be commented out. It might be something that's important. You just want to check it out. So if it was changed, locate default settings.php. It's probably in your site's default directory. Duplicate it with a new name. Copy the new default one into your install directory, and call it settings.php, and then have them both open. Reapply your previous one. Reapply like the database credentials. Probably most of the changes are going to be at the bottom of your file, but you're really going to want to look that over. And so reapply, that means copy and paste the changes to the new settings.php. So I don't know how common this scenario is, but you just want to double check the release notes. It'll probably, I imagine it's probably mostly with a minor release that this would be the case, but I don't know. So just check the release notes for that. And then step 8 is reapply any customizations to your htaccess and your robots.txt. This is especially important because this affects how sites crawl your site, and there might be some particular things related to how your domains work that you could totally break your site if you don't reapply these changes to htaccess. This is really important that you back those up and reapply your customizations. Yeah. And then step 9, upload the new code, everything, including your vendor directory, to your live environment using whatever your regular deployment method is. Okay, so we've updated, in particular, our core and vendor directories, and now we've got the new code up on the live site. We still aren't done yet, so we need to update the database now. And by default, updating access to update.php on a live site is blocked. So it's the setting called update free access. So you can find that in settings.php. So it's a good idea to know, especially if it's a good idea to have some kind of text editor on a server that you are familiar with, whether it's Vim or Nano or whatever it is. Like, know how to at least open a text file on a server and edit it and save it and not lose your, go crazy. So just understand how to do that, because you are going to want to find that on your live settings.php and change this to true, and then access update.php in a browser and follow the instructions. I'll share how you can do this using Drush, but this is just the manual option. So if there's any pending updates, you'll see that there are. You can hit apply, and it'll have a log if anything failed. Sometimes when things fail, I just run it again, and just hit that hammer until the mail goes in, right? So, but you can check the log, and if it really fails, then you've got your backup, so you can restore that. And you can access your administration pages is the way to go here, because we need to go disable maintenance mode after this. But first, as soon as you're done with your updates, go back into your settings file on your live site and change that back to false, this update free access. So you want to lock that down. You don't want just anyone to be able to access update.php on your site. Go to admin/reports/status. It'll show you the latest version of Drupal, hopefully, and it'll show you any other errors. It'll flag an error if you forgot to lock down your settings, your update free access. It'll display that error if you didn't do that. And then, so if everything's good to go, you can turn off maintenance mode. So go to back to your tab that you have open, that you left open for your own sake, and turn off maintenance mode. So yay, you've updated your Drupal site, and you didn't, everything's fine, and you can go out and take a walk and get some ice cream and celebrate on Slack or whatever. The emojis flow freely. So you've updated your site and everything is good. You can also use a tool called Drush. Anyone familiar with here? Here's the thing. I'm just going to tell you we used to use Drush all the time for everything, but you need to be a little careful now. There's some things that won't work anymore, or the commands aren't there anymore, and if you do some things the old way, you will end up with a broken site. There's also some things happening with Drush. So we've got Drush 8, which is good for sites 8.4 and under, I believe. And then we've got Drush 9, which is going to assume that you're using Composer to update your site and modules, Drupal core and modules. So there isn't even going to be commands to update in Drush 9 because it's assuming Composer. Done. So what happens when you have an 8.3 site that you're trying to update to 8.5 and you're using Drush 9? Like, I keep a copy of Drush 8 on my local, and I install Drush as a dependency on a Drupal site so that I have both. I can run Drush globally as Drush 8 to do some things, but I still have Drush 9 to use on the latest version itself. It's this weird like chicken and egg situation right now. So I like to keep both versions handy, just by necessity, because that's the way it is right now. So if you want to, for Drush 8, if you've got an older site that you need to back up, this Drush archive dump command is super handy. It runs everything. It backs up everything. So drushcommands.com, everyone familiar with drushcommands.com? This is a really handy site for looking up Drush commands. So it shows all the different versions, and you can see more of the options there. To put your site in maintenance mode, you would use, this is a way to set configuration flags. So Drush set system.maintenance_mode, and then you're going to pass in 1 to put your site in maintenance mode, and then you want to rebuild the cache. So the shortcut to that is Drush CR. So that's like the old clear cache. To update the code base only, like just the code base, you're gonna, that's our update everything. This should really be Composer update Drupal/core -- with dependencies, and then you can also run Drush PM update code Drupal. And this is like in a particular case where you're in this kind of halfway zone between like maybe you downloaded address module and it had a PHP dependency, but you didn't install your site. Your site isn't actually managed with Composer, and you've kind of got this halfway point where muddy waters. So this is a procedure that you could use. Your mileage may vary on that. And the thing to just keep in mind with that is that both Drupal core and the dependencies, and you may have some modules also that have dependency needs, both need updated. Don't use Drush up. Okay, if you've got a Drush 8 or PM update, don't do it. Like, step away. Don't. So that's gonna try and update Drupal core and any modules and run the database update. It's going to try and do everything, and you're probably going to end up with a broken site. But you can use it to update just the database. So Drush update DB will work, and that's replacing going to, editing your settings file and that update free access and all of that. So if you don't want to do that, and you have Drush installed on your production server, which I don't know, that seems kind of like maybe not such a good idea. I don't know. You can do that though on your local anyway. To take the site off maintenance mode, just pass in 0 instead of 1 and rebuild the cache. So those are some Drush commands that you can use, but just be aware that it's not like it used to be where you would kind of go through all of these Drush commands and just do it all with Drush. And you're going to have to use Composer in some way, shape, or form, or you're going to have to do some kind of manual something or another. It's just you can't do a pure Drush only path procedure to update your site. So just be aware of that. Okay, so how many of you have used the Drupal Composer template? Do you know what I mean by that? There is a, I'm going to go here first. So it's on GitHub. It's kind of a thing that's being recommended. A lot of people are throwing around, like, use the Drupal Composer template to get started managing your site with Composer. So it's out there, okay? And so there's some particular things. I had quite a few sites on my local that I had installed over the last year or so with this template. So I had a lot of update opportunities. And let me tell you, it was a big, fat mess. So I have some tips that may help you with that. Don't attempt to use Drush PM update with to update a site that was created with Composer. I just said this, right? It's so important. Like, failure will occur. Okay, so you still want to, like, keep in mind the overall procedure, right? So whatever the README says for updating Drupal core on this project, you still need to know what the big picture is. We still need to put it in maintenance mode, so you can use Drush for that. And but you're gonna want to take care to see which directory you're in and how you have Drush, configured. Obviously, we'll play into that. So the Composer template, it creates a project directory and that has a bunch of different types of files and scaffolding, and then it has a web directory, and inside the web directory is your Drupal core files. So you just want to take care to see which, you probably need to cd into web to run any Drush commands, depending on how you have Drush configured, and then you're going to cd back up one level above that to run your Composer commands. So, because that's where your composer.json file is. So step 0 is take a look at your composer.json file. Look under that require key and see what the version constraint is for Drupal core. So on my one that I had, it had tilde like 8.0 or tilde 8.3 or something like that. When I tried to run the update, Lord, how many commands are there in my head right now? The Composer, thank you, the Composer update, and then all of the things that needed to go after that, it only went up to 8.3.9. Like it, so there are some nuances to version constraints in Drupal, in Composer, that I fully admit to not fully understanding. What I found that actually worked to update a Drupal Composer template installed site from 8.3 to 8.5.3 was that. That's what worked. So the carrot 8.5.3, just note yesterday 8.5.4 came out, but this is to me like where the critical security release was. So I think it's a great idea to say my minimum version is 8.5.3 because that will get you those critical, those last 2 critical security releases at minimum on your site. So I think that's totally important. So that's what I had to do to get things working. And then this is according to the README on the project file. And so yeah, so what we have is Composer update. We're going to update Drupal core. So that means that's Drupal/core. And then here's some caveats, okay? This chicken and egg situation. Webflow, this Webflow Drupal core required dev doesn't exist on 8.3. So if you've tried to run that updating the 8.3 site, or probably even an 8.4 site, it's not actually going to work. So you might need to remove that. If you're on 8.5 already, this could still work. And then we've got Symfony / asterisks, and then the with dependencies. So what I found, what actually worked, was to not do the Drupal core require dev. And the other thing that I have a slide for in a second was the Drupal Composer template includes all these dev dependencies, and you might be running into conflicts because of all of those dev dependencies. So if you have an old one that you're updating, you're first going to want to do a Composer install no dev and I have a slide for that in a minute. But just be aware that you might be running into some dependency errors because of all of these like crazy, Behat, Mink, and all of these testing tools, PHP unit, and all of those things. Those should not be deployed to a live site, but they are provided by the Drupal Composer template. I would say, like, to be honest, the Drupal Composer template seems very appropriate if for a local development environment, but it's not a great starting point for a project that you know you're going to be deploying unless you do the work of learning some Composer and getting your Composer JSON and understanding the implications there. So I have some other suggestions at the end for how to composerize a Drupal project. And it doesn't require that you use this particular project. How are we doing on time here? So determine if any scaffolding files have changed. You can use Git for that. And restore any customizations. So it's the same process. Be sure to check the README, but understand that the documentation that you might need might be Composer documentation. And there's a little bit of troubleshooting information there, but you might just need to, think through the error messages and work through those. Maybe have someone help you out there. The gotchas that I ran into were the version constraints. So maybe trying the caret instead of the tilde might help you out there. Also, like Drush incompatibilities, like it didn't like the fact that I had Drush 8 installed. I needed to up that to Drush 9. So if you've got, most of these gotchas were because I had an old copy of the Drupal Composer template that I was trying to update. And then the incompatible dependencies, and which I resolved by doing this running composer install --no-dev. That uninstalled all of those development dependencies, all those testing tools and everything like that. You can reinstall them later. You can reinstall them on your local site, but you want to uninstall those before you commit and deploy to your site because you don't want those tools on your production site. And that also resolved all of the dependency problems that I was having, with the exception of Drush. So you still need to update the database. You still need to do that. You either need to run this on your live site, or you need to update your settings, update free access on your live site, and run that update.php on your site. And you still want to turn off maintenance mode. So it is handy to have Drush installed on your live production site, or if you have some kind of way to, through a Drush alias or something like that, you have a way to run Drush commands on a production site. It can be handy and a lot quicker to take your site on and off maintenance mode, run database updates. Any questions on that? That's like the crash course in updating with a number of different scenarios. I want to make you aware of some Drupal.org issues, but are there any questions? I totally blew over that. Yeah.
Could you address file ownership and file permissions? Because when I'm in Composer, it yells at me because it doesn't have right permissions because I have a www-data as the owner. And so then I go into change that to my user, then I go into my site and it blows up because now it's got the wrong user.
Well, now, I'm not a sysadmin. I'm just going to tell you that right now. But what I like to do is I like to make sure my group, I always run like a chmod group plus W so that the group that my user is a part of has permissions to write to things like that. So that's what I like to do. Make sure that the group is, instead of like trying to nitpick on certain users, make sure your users are part of a group, make sure that group has the appropriate permissions, and then apply those permissions to the needed directory. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
So you set up your user with www-data as a group?
Yeah, I just add my user to that group. So, yeah, and then I just always have to look that up for how to do that. So, does anyone have any insight on?
You only have to do that once.
Yeah.
Yeah. You join that group and then you have the permissions in that group.
It just makes it a lot easier. And then whenever I update my OS, like it screws it up and I have to do it again. So I just have a little note for how to do that. I have a web directory that has all my demo sites on it, and I just run that recursively on everything so that my group has permissions on all that. But for live site, yeah, you want to be a little more careful. So I would ask, find a sysadmin buddy or ask in the Drupal support channel, maybe on Slack or something like that, for particular permissions questions related to the server. Like, that's good to like get some expert opinion on that. But if you can run it on your local, get your local running, I just add write permissions to the group.
Well, what I've done is I set up my user as the first one and www data as the second one, and give write permissions or the whole permissions to both of those groups.
Yeah.
It seems to work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. Thank you for that, because that's permissions. It's always permissions, right? There's a couple of Drupal.org issues that you might want to be aware of. Adding better composer support in core initiatives, so you can check that out. The DA and people in the community are well aware of the fact that Composer is a pain point and it's confusing, and there is an initiative to try to abstract that away so that you can run updates in a more reliable fashion without needing to be an expert in Composer. And so there is work on that. If you are interested, you should check out this initiative here. And this is the patch that I used from 2 months ago. This is they're working on updating and clarifying the instructions to update.txt to check for is your site being managed with Composer. So that's where I got these instructions that I shared with you. I discovered this last night, so I updated my slides last night with this. So there's also like awareness about the procedure in the current update.txt. If you follow that and you've updated, and you've used Composer to install a contrib module, and you've done that from the Drupal root directory, you will have a broken site if you follow the instructions. So follow my instructions or go find this patch, because it's really, if you're in this area where your site isn't actually being managed with Composer, only sort of, then you're going to end up with a broken site if you follow precisely the directions in update.txt. So this begs the question, like, how do I update my site to use Composer? There's a number of different resources. Matthew Grasmick has a Composerize Drupal Composer plugin, so you can convert a non-Composer managed Drupal project into a Composer managed one. You can find that on Matthew's GitHub. That's github.com/GRASMASH/composerize-Drupal. That's a recommended path, at least according to Matthew, and who wrote Drupalize Me's Composer series. So he mentions this, and also he mentions that Drupal console has a Composerize command. I have not tested this. I have no idea how this might work. I haven't tested any of these, but these are recommended by someone that I trust, and so you might check that out as well. Now there is, just so you know, some people just love to have a module, right? They're like, the only thing I want is a module, You have to be kind of careful about that. This Composerize module, it says right there on the description page, it's not ready for prime time. So if your kind of decision-making process is it has to be a module, don't apply it to this. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this at all, because it's the project doesn't even recommend itself yet, so it's still in development. You can also do this yourself. We've got a free tutorial. I just made this free last week on use Composer with your Drupal project, and it mentions those 3 resources that I just listed, but it also shows you how you can walk through your site and get your Composer JSON files all cleaned up, and you can composerize your Drupal project. So even if you installed it with a tarball to begin with, you can convert it to be using Composer. You can have a documented process, and it will be a lot more reliable for you. To keep track of updates, I'm out of time here. You can go to the reports page. You can log into your Drupal.org account, and you can subscribe under the My Newsletters tab to update emails. You can get those once a week. You can follow Drupal Security on Twitter. There's RSS feeds for Drupal Security. There's a Drupal Slack now. You can find information about how to connect to that on drupal.org/Slack. You can join the announcements channel, and you'll get an unsolicited announcement every time it comes out, along with announcements about the code of conduct. You can check out the Drupal 8 user guide. It's hosted on Drupalize.me, but it's also hosted on Drupal.org. There's a whole chapter on security and maintenance, setting up cron, checking for updates, updating your site, kind of all sorts of things related to security and maintenance. We've got a tutorial. I'm going to be updating this I've been updating it, and to prepare for this presentation, I'm going to update it with that patch. So that to check for if your site is using Composer or not, just to clarify that process. So that's also another resource that's free. If you want to learn more about Composer, we've got a series on Drupalize.me, and there's also plenty of resources freely available online too. So just to let you know about those things. You can always go to the getcomposer.org. You're going to have to go there anyway. And happy updating. No tears. So happy updating, and I hope that this was helpful. It seemed like this would not be a big deal, but man, I ran into so many little problems thinking that I could just update my site, and it was not easy. So I put this together in hopes of trying to clarify the process, and I hope it was helpful. And make those backups, because you just don't know what you might accidentally do. So thank you very much. Any other questions? I'm happy to be out in the hallway as well. I think.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Composer. So, especially for hosting, vendors are not supporting Composer. Is it better to avoid Composer in development and other?
Well, you always. So I don't know if I made this abundantly clear or not, but you want to be making your updates and running Composer on your local site, and then committing it to Git, and then pushing it up. So this might mean committing your vendor directory to Git, right? But if you can run, like if part of your deployment process is to run a Composer install on your production site, then you don't have to commit. You don't commit your vendor, right? So
that's the tricky
so
part.
that's the tricky part too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So because we don't know what Composer exactly updates which files. Which
Right.
So
Yeah. So that's the thing to be aware of, is what kinds of Composer related commands can you run on your production server, and if you can't, then yes, you definitely need to commit your vendor directory. Run all of your updates locally with Composer, commit that vendor directory as well, and then push all of that up. And that's going to be the muddy waters for a while, until hosts catch up, until you catch up, until your projects catch up. So those are the things to be aware of. That's a great question. Yeah. All right, thank you. I think it might be lunch, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, okay.